The morning Alara Voss stepped off the stagecoach, Cole Hargrove was already planning to send her back. He hadn't wanted a wife. He'd wanted a miracle. And when the letter from the matchmaking agency in St. Louis arrived 3 months ago, he'd been drunk on 2 fingers of whiskey and the desperate arithmetic of a dying ranch, 17 head of cattle left, a water line that had run dry in August, and a banknote due in 60 days that he had absolutely no way to pay. He'd signed the paper the way a drowning man grabs a rope, not because he believed in it, because he had nothing else left to grab. But standing in the dust of Redemption Creek's Main Street, watching the stagecoach door swing open, Cole felt the full weight of his foolishness land on him all at once. He had imagined a practical woman, plain maybe, quiet, someone who could cook and mend and keep a ledger, someone who needed this arrangement as much as he did, for reasons that didn't require explanation or feeling. He had imagined a transaction, clean, simple, something he could manage without letting it get complicated. What stepped out of that coach was not what he had imagined. She was tall, almost unnervingly so for a woman in 1882, with dark hair pinned up in a way that was already losing the battle against the wind, and eyes the color of deep creek water, that particular shade of gray-green that changes depending on what's reflecting in it. She wore a practical traveling coat, dusty from the road, and she carried her own bag without waiting for help, and she looked at the town of Redemption Creek the way a general looks at unfamiliar terrain, not with fear, not with wonder, but with the quiet, calculating assessment of someone already deciding where the problems were going to be. Her gaze found him before he had properly decided to step forward, and she looked at him, really looked at him, the way most people don't bother to look at anyone, and said, in a voice that carried clean across the street noise, "You're Cole Hargrove, and you look like a man who's already trying to figure out how to get his money back." He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "You must be Miss Voss," he said. "I am," she said. "And before you say anything diplomatic, I want you to know I read between the lines of your letter. I know the ranch is in trouble. I know you didn't want a wife, and I'm not here because I wanted a husband." She picked up her bag, adjusted her grip, and looked at him steadily. "I'm here because we can help each other. Whether that becomes anything else is entirely up to the choices we both make from here forward." Cole Hargrove had survived a cattle drive through a blizzard, a barroom fight that left him with a scar along his jaw, and 3 consecutive years of drought. He was not, by any reasonable measure, an easy man to catch off balance. She caught him completely off balance. And that, though he would not admit it to himself for a very long time, was the precise moment everything began. The Hargrove Ranch sat 6 miles east of Redemption Creek, up a long dirt road that cut through scrub brush and dry grass, and the occasional dramatic outcropping of red rock that reminded you, in case you'd forgotten, that this land didn't particularly care about you. Cole had inherited it from his father 8 years ago, along with the debt, the reputation, and the bone-deep understanding that the land was beautiful and indifferent in equal measure. You could love it. You could work it. You could pour everything you had into it, and it would take all of that and give you back exactly as much as it decided you deserved, no more, no less, and never on your schedule. He had loved this ranch since before he could name the feeling. He had walked its fences as a boy, had learned to read weather in the color of the sky above the eastern ridge, had sat with his father on the porch in the evenings, and listened to the man talk about what this land could become, what it was meant to be. His father had been a visionary in the way that sometimes tips over into recklessness, always one good season away from the dream, always believing the next year would be the turning point. The turning point had never come, and his father had died with his boots on and his debts unpaid, leaving Cole with both his love for this place and his clear-eyed understanding that love alone does not keep a ranch alive. The ride out from town was quiet. Alara sat beside him on the wagon bench, her bag wedged between them, and she watched the landscape with the same focused attention she'd given the town, not passive looking, but active reading, like a person who expects the terrain to tell her something useful if she pays close enough attention. "That grass line," she said after about 2 miles. She gestured to the east where the scrub gave way to a long, flat stretch. "It's different there, greener even now. Why?" Cole glanced over. "Underground spring, maybe. Or was once. That section floods in a heavy rain, but it's been dry so long most people don't think about it anymore." She nodded slowly, filing it away. He noticed that about her immediately, the way she absorbed information without asking unnecessary follow-up questions. She asked what she needed to ask, heard the answer, and kept moving. It was efficient in a way that he found both impressive and slightly unnerving. He was used to conversations that took longer to get to the point. "How many acres?" she asked. 42 working. Another 108 that I can't do much with currently. Water access is the problem." "How long has the main line been dry?" "Since June of last year." She was quiet for a moment, then, "And the cattle?" 17 head, lost 60 in the drought, sold another 20 to cover the spring payment." She didn't say anything to that. She didn't say "I'm sorry" or "that's terrible" or any of the things people said when they wanted to acknowledge difficulty without actually engaging with it. She just sat with the information, and he had the strange feeling that she was already doing something with it, already running calculations, already building something in her mind that he couldn't see yet. The ranch house came into view as they crested the last low hill, and Cole watched her face the way he always watched people's faces when they saw it for the first time. He had learned to read that moment. Some people saw the decay first, the weathered boards, the porch railing that needed replacing, the barn that listed slightly to the west. Some people saw the bones of the place, the good lines of it, the way it sat in the landscape as if it had grown there rather than been built. Ilara Voss looked at the Hargrove Ranch for a long, still moment. "It has good bones," she said. Something in his chest moved, though he couldn't have said precisely what. "That's what I've always thought," he said. She turned and looked at him then, not the long assessing look from the street, but something quicker, more personal, like she'd caught a glimpse of something she hadn't expected to find and was recalibrating accordingly. Then she looked back at the ranch. "Show me the water situation first," she said. "Everything else can wait." He had prepared a room for her. It was small. The house had only 2 bedrooms, and his father's old study had been converted awkwardly into something livable, with a narrow bed and a window that faced west and caught the sunset. He had put clean linens on the bed, which had required finding clean linens, which had required more effort than he was comfortable admitting. He had also swept the floor and removed a collection of ranch ledgers that had migrated onto the shelf above the bed, which had taken nearly an hour to relocate because he couldn't simply throw them away, and finding places for them meant acknowledging how chaotic his organizational system had become. He showed her the room with the particular awkward formality of a man who is aware he is failing to meet some standard, but cannot quite identify which one. She set her bag down, looked at the window, looked at the small desk he'd pushed against the wall and turned around. "This works," she said. "Thank you for the linens." He hadn't expected her to notice the linens specifically. "It wasn't any trouble," he said, which was not true. "You swept," she said, glancing at the floor with the slight tilt of her head that he was already learning meant she was nodding something. "Floors need sweeping," he said. Something shifted at the corner of her mouth, not quite a smile, not quite amusement, something more complicated than both. "They do," she agreed. "I'll manage my own room going forward, and the kitchen if that's acceptable. I'd rather understand the space before we work out a division of responsibilities." "That's fine," he said. "Good." She turned back to her bag and began to unpack with the same efficient deliberateness she seemed to bring to everything, and he understood, without her saying it, that he was dismissed. He went back out to the main room, sat down at the table, and stared at the far wall for a moment. He was not sure what he had expected. But whatever it hadn't been this composed, competent, unsettling woman who looked at his dying ranch the way a doctor looks at a patient, without sentiment but without cruelty either, as if she genuinely intended to understand what was wrong and fix it. He found himself hopping, in a way he was not prepared for that she could. The first week was all practicality. That was the agreement they had settled into without formally discussing it. That they would be professional, that they would be useful to each other, that the personal dimension of the arrangement could wait until the immediate problems were addressed. Alara moved through the ranch with that focused attention of hers, asking questions of the ranch hands. There were two left, Berto and young Sam, who was 17 and had no other options, taking notes in a small leather-bound journal she carried everywhere, and examining things with her hands as much as her eyes. She tested soil. She traced fence lines. She spent an entire afternoon at the dried water channel, crouched in the dirt, studying the ground with an intensity that made Berto ask Cole, quietly, if the new missus was all right. "She's fine," Cole said. "She's been down there 3 hours," Berto said. "She's thinking," Cole said, and was surprised to find that he said it with something that felt like quiet respect. That evening, Alara came to dinner with dirt on her boots and her hair escaping from its pins in 3 separate places, and she sat down at the table and opened her journal and said, without preamble, "The underground water table is still there." Cole looked up from his plate. The channel dried up because the inlet got blocked. There was a collapse, probably during the last heavy storm, about a quarter-mile upstream from where the line branches. The water is still moving. It's just being redirected. It's going west instead of toward the ranch. She turned the journal so he could see a diagram she'd drawn, clean, precise, more technically detailed than anything he would have expected from someone who'd arrived 3 days ago. "If we clear the collapse and rebuild the inlet, we can redirect the flow back. It would require 2 days of work, maybe 3. Possibly 4 if the collapse is larger than I can estimate from the surface." Cole stared at the diagram, then at her. "How do you know this?" he asked. She met his gaze steadily. "My father was a surveyor and a civil engineer. I grew up working with him. I can read water and land the way most people read text." A slight pause. "It wasn't in the letter I sent the agency. I didn't know if it would be considered relevant." He looked at her for a long moment. Outside, the evening wind moved through the dry grass, and somewhere distant, one of the remaining cattle called out and went quiet. "It's relevant," he said. "I thought it might be," she said. And for the first time since she'd arrived, something eased in Cole Hargrove's chest. Not all the way, nothing had eased all the way in years, but something. A fraction of the constant, grinding tension that he'd carried for so long he'd stopped feeling it as tension and started feeling it as simply the weight of being himself. He didn't say thank you. He wasn't built for easy gratitude, but he looked at her across the table in the yellow lamplight, at the dirt on her boots and the escaped hair and the precise lines of her diagram, and he said, "I'll start gathering equipment in the morning." And she said, "I'll be up before you." She was. There is an intimacy in hard physical labor that no one warns you about. Cole had always known this, had felt it in the particular bond between men who work cattle together, who trust each other without ceremony, because trust is encoded in every coordinated movement, every shared assessment of a situation, every moment where one person's mistake would cost the other person something real. He had not expected to feel it with Alara Vos. She was not just competent, she was gifted. He understood this fully on the second day of the water work when they were 3 feet down in the collapsed section, and the wall of the channel showed them a complication, a secondary blockage, older than the recent collapse, that changed the entire geometry of the problem. He would have assessed it, discussed it with Berto, come up with a plan that would have worked eventually. Alara looked at it for approximately 45 seconds, made 2 marks on the channel wall with a piece of chalk she produced from her jacket pocket, and said, "We go through here and here. It opens the original flow path without disturbing the secondary structure. 3 hours of work instead of 2 days. She was right, it took 2.5 hours. The water came back on a Thursday afternoon, running clear through the rebuilt inlet into the main channel, spreading out into the dry ground with the particular sound. A low, continuous, deeply satisfying sound of something returning to what it was meant to be. Berto made a noise that was almost a sob and converted it into a cough very unconvincingly. Young Sam stood with his hands on his hips and shook his head in disbelief. Cole stood at the edge of the channel and watched the water run, and after a moment he was aware that Alara was standing beside him, close enough that he could have reached out and touched her arm without effort, and she was also watching the water, and she was also, he realized, smiling, really smiling, not the careful quarter smile she used in ordinary conversation, but something broader and less guarded and genuinely, unambiguously happy. He had not seen that before. It changed her face in a way that was difficult to look at directly without feeling something you weren't prepared to feel. "Your father taught you well," he said. She glanced at him and the smile shifted slightly, softened, became more complex, touched somewhere in her that the professional composure usually covered. "He did," she said. "He always said water was the most honest thing in nature. It goes where the ground tells it to, follows the path of least resistance, finds the low places. It doesn't pretend to be something it isn't." Cole thought about that. Sounds like he was talking about more than water. "He usually was," she said, and something in her tone told him there was more to that story, more depth behind it, and she wasn't going to volunteer it, not today, maybe not for a long time, but it was there, waiting like the water in the underground channel. Present, patient, moving in its own direction in the dark. The rhythms of the ranch settled into something that surprised him. He had expected friction, had expected the constant low-grade difficulty of sharing a space with a stranger, the negotiation of habits and silences, and the 100 small territorial adjustments that came with proximity. He had lived alone for 4 years after his last ranch hand had left, and he had adjusted himself to solitude the way you adjust to a room without windows. You stop noticing what's missing after a while. What he found instead was that Alara Voss was remarkably easy to coexist with. Not because she was quiet or undemanding, she was neither, particularly, but because she seemed to have an instinctive understanding of when to speak and when to let things be, and she occupied space without imposing on it, and she never seemed to need anything from him emotionally that he didn't know how to give. She was, in the most unexpected way, restful. Which was not at all what he would have predicted from a woman who, in the span of her first week, had redesigned his water infrastructure. They established routines without discussing them. He made coffee in the mornings because he was always up first, despite her claim that she would be. She was up 10 minutes after him every day and accepted the coffee without ceremony. He cooked dinners. She handled the kitchen organization and supplies with a precision that resulted in him being able to find things where he expected to find them for the first time in years. They worked the ranch through the days, together when the work called for it, separately when it didn't, and in the evenings they sat at the table or on the porch, and she wrote in her journal or read from the books she'd brought, and he worked on the ledgers or on whatever piece of equipment needed mending, and the silence between them was comfortable in a way that silence had not been for him in a very long time. He noticed things about her. The way you notice things when someone is consistently present and you are paying attention whether you intend to or not. He noticed that she was left-handed and that she held her pen with a slight unusual angle and that her handwriting was precise and small and leaned slightly backward, as if resisting the direction of movement. He noticed that she was careful about her hands, not vain about them, but careful, the way someone is careful about tools they rely on, and that she applied a particular salve to them each evening after work. He noticed that she had exactly 3 responses to things that surprised her: a slight pause before speaking, a tilt of her head to the left, and a brief expression that crossed her face too quickly to fully read but which might have been something like delight. He noticed that she laughed only occasionally, but genuinely, a short, unguarded sound that she sometimes seemed to take herself by surprise with. He noticed all of these things and told himself firmly that he was simply paying attention the way a person pays attention to any significant new presence in their environment. This was completely true and also, in a way he was not ready to examine, completely insufficient as an explanation. The second revelation came at the end of the second week, and it arrived through cattle. Cole had been trying to address the health of the remaining 17 head. They were underfed, undersocialized after the losses of the drought, and displaying the particular low-energy dejection of animals that have been through something hard and not recovered from it. He had been managing it as best he could, but he was not a veterinarian and his options were limited. He came in from the south pasture one morning to find Alara standing inside the pen with the cattle, which was not unusual in itself. She'd been helping with basic care from the beginning. What was unusual was what she was doing. She was standing very still in the center of the group, not directing them, not managing them, simply present, and one of the older cows, Birch, who had been the most withdrawn since the drought, who had not come forward to be handled in months, was standing with her head against Alara's shoulder, breathing slowly, while Alara's hand moved in long, quiet strokes along the animal's neck. Cole stopped at the fence and watched. He didn't announce himself. He wasn't sure why, some instinct that the moment was fragile in a way that noise would break. After a while, Alara said without looking up, "They need to be touched, not just fed and watered. They need contact." "I know," he said, "I haven't had the time," which was a partial truth. The whole truth was more complicated. "I can work with them each day," she said. "I was good with my father's animals. I don't know everything about cattle specifically, but I know what anxious living creatures need." "What do they need?" he asked, even though he knew. He wanted to hear how she said it. She considered the question with the seriousness she gave to everything. "Consistency," she said finally, "gentleness, the understanding that someone is going to come back." Birch pressed her enormous soft head more firmly against Alara's shoulder, and Alara's eyes closed for a moment, just a moment, a private moment that he felt he shouldn't be seeing, and something passed across her face that was deep and still and old. Not sadness exactly. Something that had moved past sadness into something quieter and more settled. Cole stayed at the fence for a long time, long enough that she knew he was still there, long enough that they were both aware of it and neither addressed it. The morning went on around them. The cattle moved slowly in their unhurried way, and the water ran in the channel he could hear from here, the clean sound of it doing what it was meant to do. Redemption Creek had opinions. This was not surprising. Small towns always have opinions, and they hold them with the intensity of people who don't have enough space to spread their certainties out thin. The Hargrove Ranch had been a topic of local conversation for years. The question of whether Cole would manage to save it, the question of what had happened to it under his father's management, the question of the debt and the drought, and whether the whole thing would eventually be sold off and absorbed into the larger daily operation to the north. The arrival of the mail-order bride had added several new dimensions to an already rich subject. They went into town together for the first time on a Saturday for supplies. Cole had been braced for it. He knew the texture of this town's attention, had lived inside it his whole life, and he had tried in the days before to think of something useful to say to Alara about it. He hadn't found the words. She made it unnecessary. She walked into Connolly's general store with that same contained, direct energy she brought to everything, introduced herself to Sarah Connolly with a handshake and direct eye contact, asked 2 precise questions about supply quality and delivery options, and within 15 minutes had somehow managed to convey, without statting it, that she was competent and serious and not interested in gossip, and perfectly capable of distinguishing between people who wanted to actually know her and people who simply wanted information about her. Sarah Connolly, who was 53 and had known Cole since he was born and had definite opinions about this whole mail-order-bride situation, watched Alara for a moment after their exchange, and then looked at Cole with an expression that meant, "Well, all right then." The harder moment came at the saloon, where Cole had stopped to speak with the bank's local man, Aldrich, about the note. Alara had waited in the wagon, her choice, not his, and while he was inside, three men he half knew, drifters associated with the daily operation, stopped near the wagon. He didn't hear what they said to her. He came out to find them still there and her still in the wagon, and the quality of the air had the particular tightness of a situation that had been managed but not resolved. He looked at her face. She looked back at him, and her expression was composed, and in her eyes there was something flat and cool that he had not seen there before. He looked at the men. They assessed each other briefly, the way men do. The men moved on. He climbed into the wagon, picked up the reins, and they drove out of town. 3 minutes of silence. "Are you all right?" he said. "Yes," she said. Another silence. "What did they say?" She looked at her hands for a moment. "Nothing I haven't heard variations of before. Men who see a woman in an unfamiliar situation and decide that means she's available for their interpretation of it." He felt something tighten in his jaw. "I should have." "You didn't know," she said calmly. "I handled it. I always handle it." "That's not," he stopped, started again. "You shouldn't have to always handle it." She turned and looked at him, and the flat coolness in her eyes was gone, replaced by something more complicated. Assessment, yes, but also something else, something that was the beginning of a question she wasn't sure she was ready to ask. "No," she said after a moment. "I suppose I shouldn't." They drove the rest of the way in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before, not the comfortable shared quiet of their evenings, but something more charged, more aware. He was aware of how close she was on the bench. He was aware of the way the afternoon light came at a low angle and touched the side of her face. He was aware that something had shifted between them, not dramatically, not irreversibly, but shifted, moved a few degrees in a direction that he didn't have a name for and was not entirely sure he wanted to name. That night on the porch, she said, "How close is the banknote deadline?" 41 days, he said. "Tell me the full picture," she said. "Not the version where you protect me from the difficult parts, the actual number." He told her. All of it, the debt amount, the payment history, the conversations with Aldrich, the daily operation standing offer to purchase, which he had refused 3 times and which he was increasingly unsure he could refuse a 4th time. She listened without interruption. When he finished, she was quiet for a while, looking out at the dark of the ranch, at the way the stars came in so thick and low out here that the sky seemed almost to be pressing down. "The cattle are the key," she said. "If we can get them healthy and breeding by spring, and if the water holds, and it will hold, you can have a viable herd for market by fall. That's not enough to pay the note in full, but it might be enough for Aldrich to extend the terms." "He's not inclined to extend," Cole said. "He might be if the alternative is taking on a property with a functioning water system and a recovering herd, which is worth significantly more than a distressed sale would suggest." She paused. "I can write a projection, something formal, with the engineering assessments and the water capacity calculations and a realistic cattle recovery timeline. A document that makes the value visible to someone who only sees the current numbers." He looked at her in the darkness. "You can do that?" "Yes," she said simply. He was quiet for a moment. The night sounds of the ranch moved around them, the distant cattle, the wind in the grass, a horse shifting in the barn. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Not I know the arrangement, I mean why this much? You could do the minimum, you're doing significantly more than the minimum." She considered the question. "I don't know how to do the minimum," she said. "It's not how I was made." Another pause, longer. "And I think this place is worth saving. I've thought so since I saw it from the road." Because it has good bones, he said. Because it has good bones, she confirmed. The stars moved slowly overhead. Neither of them went inside for a long while. It was Berto who noticed first. Berto noticed most things. He was 61 years old, had spent 40 of those years working ranches, and had developed over those decades the particular patient observational quality of a man who has learned that the land rewards attention and punishes assumptions. He noticed the way Cole watched Alara when she was working. He noticed the way Cole's voice changed, barely, almost imperceptibly, but changed, when he spoke to her versus when he spoke to anyone else. And he noticed, most importantly, that Cole didn't seem to be aware of any of it. He mentioned none of this to Cole. He was a wise man in the specific way that practical people are sometimes wise, not through theory, but through the accumulated evidence of things he had watched happen over and over again in human lives. And he understood that certain things have to arrive in their own time and cannot be moved by anything external, no more than water can be made to run uphill by wanting it to. What Berto did do was find small reasons to give them time alone on the same tasks. This was not difficult to arrange. The fence line needed repairing, 2 miles of it, on the north section where the ground had been eroding since the drought. Cole was doing it section by section, and Alara had fallen into the habit of working alongside him when she didn't have other things to manage, not because the work required 2 people, but because 2 people worked more efficiently than one. They developed a rhythm to it. He set the posts, she ran the wire and tensioned it, and they moved down the line together in the particular easy synchrony of people who have learned each other's working pace without having to discuss it. On the 3rd day of the fence work, the sky turned in the afternoon. Cole felt it before he saw it, the change in the air, the weight of it, the way the wind shifted from south to west and picked up a quality that meant rain. Real rain, not the false promises of the last year and a half. He looked up and saw the cloud line building in the northwest, the real purple dark mass of it, moving fast. "We need to get in," he said. She looked up, assessed the sky with the quick competence he'd come to expect from her, and nodded. They collected the tools and made for the wagon, and the rain came before they got there. Not gradually, the way you sometimes get warning rain, but all at once, the way it sometimes does in this country. A full committed downpour that turned the dust to mud in 30 seconds and soaked through clothing almost as fast. They ran for the barn, which was closer than the house, and made it inside breathless, completely soaked, both of them, and stood just inside the door while the rain hammered the roof with the tremendous sound of it, filling the air with the smell of wet earth and hay, and the deep clean smell of water that has been missing for a long time. Cole looked at Alara. She was drenched, her hair entirely free of its pins now, dark against her neck and face, and she was breathing hard from the run, and she was laughing. Not the small private laugh he'd heard before, but something louder and less contained, bright with the particular joy that comes from being caught in something uncontrollable and finding it funny rather than alarming. He had not been prepared for that. The laugh, the rain, the way she looked, none of it. He stood and watched her for a moment, and the watching had a quality he couldn't control, a quality of being arrested by something, stopped by it, unable to move past it. She turned and caught him watching, and the laugh faded into something smaller and more uncertain, and they were standing 3 feet apart in the dry interior of the barn while rain made the world outside into a wall of sound and water. "Good rain," she said after a moment. "Yes," he said. Her eyes were that gray-green color, and the low barn light made them seem deeper than usual, and he was aware, with the particular sharp awareness of someone who has been successfully not being aware of something for several weeks, of how close she was standing. He took a small, deliberate step back, found something to do with his hands, the fence tool, setting it against the wall. "I'll check on the cattle," he said. "Cole," she said. He turned. She was looking at him with that expression he'd never been able to fully read, not quite a question, not quite a statement, something in between that required more bravery to respond to than he currently possessed. "The water projection," she said. "I finished the draft last night. I'd like you to look at it this evening if you have time." "All right," he said. He went to check on the cattle. The cattle were fine. He stood in the pasture shelter for longer than necessary, rain drumming on the corrugated roof, and had a very serious conversation with himself about what he was doing and what he was not going to do, and how he was going to manage to be a reasonable professional person for the remaining 30-something days of this banknote deadline, and not make something complicated out of something that didn't need to be complicated. The conversation was not very persuasive. The projection document was extraordinary. He understood this even through the limited lens of his knowledge. He could read figures, could understand balance sheets and land assessments. But this was something else, a complete technical and financial argument for the viability of the ranch, laid out with the kind of architectural clarity that made the strength of the case feel inevitable. The water capacity analysis was precise, drawing on real measurements she had taken across 3 weeks. The cattle recovery timeline was conservative and detailed. The land use analysis identified 3 sections of the property that were currently unused and could support significant additional development with existing water access. He sat at the table and read it twice, slowly, while she sat across from him and worked on something else and tried to look as if she wasn't watching him read it. "Ilara," he said. "Oh, this is something extraordinary." She looked up, the careful expression, the slight tilt of the head. "This is not something a mail order bride sent by a general agency does," he said. "I mean that as direct observation, not a criticism. This is the work of someone with formal training and significant experience." She put down her pen. "I told you my father was an engineer. There's more to it than that." A pause. He waited, and he was getting better at waiting with her, understanding that she processed questions before answering them, that her answers were worth the wait, that pushing got you less than patience. "I worked as an assistant surveyor and land assessor for 4 years after my father died," she said, "in St. Louis for a firm that handled railroad land acquisitions. I was very good at it. Good enough that I was given responsibilities that were not technically in the scope of an assistant's position." She paused again. "And good enough that when the firm's primary client decided that having a woman in a visible professional role was affecting their other client relationships, the firm let me go rather than lose the contract." Silence. He looked at her. "I had 2 options," she said. "I could have found another position, likely at a significant reduction in responsibility and pay, in a role that didn't use my actual skills, or I could do something else entirely." A small, complicated curve at the corner of her mouth. "I decided to do something else entirely." "You answered an ad for a frontier ranch wife," he said. "I answered an ad for a person who needed practical skills in a practical situation." She said, "The ranch was a coincidence, or not a coincidence exactly. My father always said the best work you can do is work that's real, that matters to something living. I spent 4 years helping railroad companies acquire land so they could lay tracks over it and take what was under it." She looked at the document between them. "I would rather help something actually grow." He held that, let it sit. "I'm sorry about the firm," he said. "I'm not," she said, and then with a slight emphasis that he heard clearly, "not anymore." The lamp burned between them. Outside, the rain had gentled to a low, steady sound. Somewhere in the house, a board settled with the particular creak of old wood in wet weather. "I'll take this to Aldrich on Tuesday," he said. "Will you come?" She looked at him, and this time the expression was clear, not complex, something direct and warm and slightly uncertain, as if she was surprised to be asked. "Yes," she said, "I'll come." Something happened in the 3rd week that neither of them discussed, and both of them felt. It started with Margaret Daly. Margaret Daly was the sister of the daily operations owner, Edwin Daly, and she had arrived in Redemption Creek from Denver 3 weeks earlier to manage her brother's interests, while he was away on business in the East. She was 32, clever, and had made no secret of the fact that she considered Cole Hargrove the most interesting person in the territory, a sentiment she had communicated over the years through a combination of direct statement and the particular social chemistry of a woman who is accustomed to getting what she finds interesting. Cole had never been oblivious to her attention. He also hadn't known what to do with it. Margaret Daly was appealing in the abstract way that confident, intelligent women are always appealing, but there was something in her approach, some quality of managing rather than connecting, that had always made him pull back. He hadn't pulled back very decisively, just enough to maintain ambiguity. He should have resolved that ambiguity before Ilara arrived. He hadn't thought to. He hadn't thought it mattered. It turned out to matter. Margaret came out to the ranch on a Wednesday, ostensibly to discuss the water table, a legitimate concern, since the daily operation drew from the same general system. But the visit's real purpose was not the water table, and everyone present understood that. She was warm and social in the practiced way of someone who has learned that warmth deployed well is a useful tool, and she brought a pie, which was an appropriate social gift, and she sat at the kitchen table and talked to Cole about water rights and spring plans and summer grazing, and Ilara was there for all of it, and the visit lasted 2 hours. Cole navigated the 2 hours with the unease of a man who is aware that he has walked into a social geometry he doesn't fully understand and cannot control. He was pleasant to Margaret because he genuinely liked her in a limited, uncomplicated way. He was aware of Ilara's presence throughout in a way that he could not have fully explained, a constant low-level awareness, like a second compass pointing in a fixed direction. He was aware that Ilara's contributions to the conversation were spare and precise and correct, and that she was watching with those gray-green eyes in the particular mode he'd come to recognize as the mode where she was seeing things he wasn't seeing. After Margaret left, Ilara went immediately out to the cattle pen and stayed there through dinner. He made food and left a plate covered on the stove. When she came in, after dark, her color heightened from the cold. She found it without comment, ate it at the table while he was finishing the ledgers, and then said good night and went to her room. He sat at the table for a long time after. He knew what the silence meant. He was not a foolish man about feelings, despite his limited experience of them. He had grown up watching his father mismanage emotions the way he mismanaged everything else, with grand gestures substituting for genuine understanding, and he had made a specific effort in his own life to not do that. He knew what avoidance looked like. He knew the difference between the comfortable silence they usually shared and what she had given him that evening, which was not silence so much as the deliberate absence of warmth. What he didn't know was what he wanted to do about it, because doing something about it meant acknowledging, out loud to himself and possibly to her, what the source of it was. And the source of it, the reason it mattered to her, the reason the distance stung him the way it did, that was territory he had not yet decided he was ready to enter. The next day was worse. She was professional. She was efficient. She worked the cattle with the same gentle attention. She ate meals at the table. She responded to direct questions with direct answers. But the particular quality of her presence that had made the last 3 weeks feel like something, that quality was absent, and its absence was louder than any argument would have been. On the third day, young Sam said something to Berto that Sam clearly thought was quiet enough not to carry, and it carried. "She seems sad," he said. "Don't," Berto said, in a tone that ended the conversation. Cole pretended he hadn't heard. He was not proud of pretending. It was a fence post that broke the distance. Not dramatically, nothing dramatic about it. He was repairing a section on the west line alone, because Ilara had taken the morning to work on the water inlet's secondary drainage, and he was on the fourth post when the post driver slipped and came down wrong, and the handle caught him across the palm with enough force to split the skin cleanly and produce an immediate extraordinary amount of blood. He wrapped it in his handkerchief, finished the post because he was stubborn and because stopping felt like losing, and then came back to the barn where the first aid was kept. He was trying to manage it one-handed, which was going badly, when Alara appeared in the barn doorway. She saw his hand. Her face went very still in a different way than usual, not composed, not calculating, but arrested. She crossed to him in 3 strides, took his hand in both of hers without asking, unwrapped the handkerchief, and looked at the cut with the focused attention that was hers in everything, but which, applied to his injury, felt completely different from how it usually felt. "You should have come in immediately," she said. Her voice was even. "I had 3 posts left," he said. "3 posts," she repeated, in a tone that was not quite exasperation and not quite something else. She went to the supply shelf, came back with the medical kit, and cleaned and bound the cut with the same precise competence she brought to everything, and he sat on the workbench and let her, which was its own kind of surrender. Her hands were careful and warm and absolutely steady, and he was aware of them on his hand with a precision that was almost painful. "Alara," he said. She tied off the bandaging, didn't look up. "I don't want Margaret Daly," he said. "I want you to know that." A stillness fell over her hands. She looked up. "I don't know exactly what I want to say next," he said honestly. "I have not been in the habit of saying things like this. I'm not good at it. But I know that this week has been. I know the difference between how it's been this week and how it was before. And I don't want to go back to this week." She looked at him for a long moment. Her hands were still holding his. The cut throbbed steadily. "You should have said something sooner," she said. But her voice had changed. The warmth was back, the particular quality of it, present again like water returning to a dry channel. "I know," he said. "I was being careful." "Of what?" "Of making something complicated that you hadn't asked to be complicated." She was very quiet for a moment, looking at his hand in hers. "Cole," she said finally, "I came here to make an arrangement work. I have been trying very hard not to want anything more than that because I didn't know if it was welcome." "It's welcome," he said. She raised her eyes to his. Closer than they'd been before, barn light catching the green in her gray eyes, and the moment had the quality of a held breath, of something balanced at the edge of something. She let go of his hand, stood up, collected the medical kit with her usual efficiency. "Don't do anything with that hand today," she said. "All right," he said. "And tomorrow you're finishing those posts with proper technique." "All right," he said. She went to the barn door and paused, and she was half lit by the outside brightness and half in the shadow. And she looked at him over her shoulder with an expression that was complicated and warm, and not at all like the professional composure he'd spent 3 weeks learning to read. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for saying it." He watched her walk out into the morning light. He sat on the workbench for a while afterward, hand throbbing, looking at nothing in particular, feeling something he hadn't felt in so long that it took him a while to recognize it as a form of happiness. The meeting with Aldrich was Monday. On Sunday evening, the air in the ranch house held a different quality than it had held before, not tension exactly, but awareness. The kind of awareness that exists between people who have said something true to each other and have not yet said everything, who are moving carefully toward something without rushing toward it, because some things, if you rush toward them, turn out to be smaller than they appeared from a distance, and what was building between them was something neither of them wanted to be smaller than it appeared. Alara had spent the afternoon going over the projection document, adding 2 final sections, one on the potential of the North Field with proper water access, one on the labor economics of a recovering herd versus the distressed sale value. It was thorough. It was, Cole thought, reading over her shoulder when she showed it to him, the best argument for the ranch's value that had ever been made. "You know," he said, When you leave. I'm not leaving, she said. He stopped. The arrangement is. I know what the arrangement is, she said, in a tone that was calm and direct and final. I'm telling you how I feel about it. The arrangement is what we make of it. He looked at her. The lamp was behind her and she was looking up at him from the document with those eyes, steady and clear and not performing anything. Just true. All right, he said. Good, she said, and turned back to the document. He found, after a moment, that he was smiling. He turned away before she could see it, which was completely unnecessary because she absolutely saw it, and the small sound from the direction of the table a moment later might or might not have been a laugh that she converted into a cough. That night they sat on the porch longer than usual. The sky was enormous and the stars were very bright, the way they get after rain when the air is clean, and the night sounds of the ranch moved around them with the comfortable familiarity of something they had both, over these weeks, come to know as home. Tell me about your father, Cole said. She was quiet for a moment in the way that was thinking, not reluctance. He was the kindest man I've ever known, she said, and the most restless. He was never quite satisfied with where he was, always thinking about the next survey, the next problem, the next place the ground had something to say. I used to be angry about that as a child. It meant we moved often. It meant I never had roots the way other children did. She paused. He died when I was 23, on a survey in Missouri during a crossing. The current was stronger than it looked. A quiet pause. Afterward, I understood the restlessness better. I understood that he was always looking for the right place, and I think he never quite found it. Is that why you answered the advertisement? Cole asked carefully. Looking for the right place. She considered this honestly. Partly, she said. I think I also wanted to find out if I was capable of staying. Something in the simplicity of that landed on him with significant weight. He thought of his own relationship with staying, of the ranch, of the years after his father's death, of the particular quality of commitment it took to choose, over and over, to remain in a difficult place because you believed in it. Are you, he said, capable of staying? She turned and looked at him. The porch light was minimal, and her face in the near dark was quieter than usual, softer without the composure of daytime. Yes, she said. I think I am. I think I might be more capable of it than I knew. They sat together in the dark for a long time, shoulders not quite touching, the breath of the ranch around them and the particular feeling between them. The feeling that had been building since that first moment on the main street of Redemption Creek was present and warm and patient, like the water in the underground channel, moving in its own direction, finding its level, going where the ground guided it. His hand, bandaged and still tender, rested on the porch railing. Her hand rested near it, not touching, close enough that the air between them was something you could feel. Neither of them closed the distance. Not that night. Some things arrive in their own time, and there is a specific grace in knowing when something is not yet ready to be said or done, in understanding that the waiting is not absence but accumulation, every hour of it building the thing that's coming. They went inside separately, said good night at the hallway, and went to their respective rooms, and the walls of the house held both of them and the ranch breathed in the dark outside, and tomorrow was Monday. They drove to Redemption Creek in the morning under a sky that had the sharp clarity of autumn approaching, not cold yet, but carrying in its light the first faint suggestion of change, the angle of sun shifting, the shadows coming earlier. Cole had put on his good coat. Alara wore a gray traveling jacket over a dark dress that he hadn't seen before, and her hair was precisely arranged, and she carried the projection document in a leather portfolio that looked professional and correct. And when she climbed into the wagon, she looked exactly like what she was, a person who was fully prepared for what came next. He had not brought her with him to speak for him. He had brought her because the document was hers, and she understood it better than he did, and because Aldrich needed to understand that the case being made was serious and fully developed, not a desperate man's wishful thinking. That was the practical reason. There was also a less practical reason, which was simply that he had found over the last several weeks that facing difficult things was easier with her present. He did not examine this too carefully. Aldrich's office was above the bank on Main Street, a small room with a large desk and the particular smell of paper and dust that bankers' offices seem to accumulate regardless of location. Aldrich himself was 55, meticulous, and operating under the very clear directive of his superiors that the Hargrove account needed to resolve itself one way or another before end of year. He had not expected Alara. He tried not to show that he hadn't expected her and was not entirely successful. She put the portfolio on his desk, opened it to the first section, and began to talk. Cole had heard her speak before, obviously. He had heard her explain things to Berto and Sam, had heard her talk through problems and solutions with the same clear, sequential logic. But he had not heard her talk to someone she needed to convince, and it was different. It had a different energy, not aggressive, not performed, but directed, like the sun through a lens, focused and very hot. She walked Aldrich through the document section by section, answering his questions before he fully articulated them, addressing the objections he was forming on his face before he raised them, and doing all of it with the calm certainty of a person who knows exactly what the numbers say because she put them there herself. Cole said almost nothing. He didn't need to. Aldrich studied the water capacity assessment for a long time. "You did these calculations yourself," he said to Alara. "I did," she said. "I can walk you through the methodology if you'd like. The measurements are from 3 separate points along the channel over a 2-week period to account for variation. You have engineering training." "My father was a civil engineer and land surveyor. I worked as a professional assessor for 4 years in St. Louis." Aldrich looked at Cole. Cole said nothing. Aldrich looked back at Alara, back at the document. He didn't say yes that day. He said he needed to review it with the bank's board. He said he would have an answer within 2 weeks. He said, and this was the moment that mattered, that the case was more substantial than he had anticipated, and that the bank would give it serious consideration. Outside on the street afterward, Cole stood next to the wagon and exhaled. "It's not decided yet," she said, but there was something alive in her eyes, a brightness, a particular quality of satisfaction that came from having done difficult work well. "No," he said, "but it's possible now. It wasn't possible before." She looked at him for a moment, the morning light around her. Dust from the street, moving in the light between them. "We should get back," she said. "Alara," he said. She stopped. "Thank you," he said. "Not for the document, or for the document too, but not only, for all of it." She looked at him steadily for a moment, and in her expression was everything she hadn't said yet. All of the distance covered between the stagecoach and this moment. All of the weeks of work and silence and water and fences, and the specific slow accumulation of knowing someone, really knowing them, in the way that only sustained proximity and genuine attention can build. "You're welcome," she said quietly. They drove home together, close on the wagon bench, and somewhere around the 2nd mile she allowed the side of her shoulder to rest against his, a small deliberate thing, steady against the sway of the wagon, and he did not move away. The answer came on a Friday, 14 days later. A rider from town brought a letter, and Cole took it out to the porch and stood there with it for a moment before he opened it. The bank agreed to extend the note. Modified terms, a restructured payment schedule based on the projected cattle recovery with a review in 18 months. Not forgiveness, not a gift, a bet on the future of the ranch backed by the evidence Alara had built. He came inside. She was at the table with her journal, and she looked up when she heard his boots on the floor, and she read his face before he said a word. She stood up. He crossed to the table and put the letter down in front of her, and she picked it up and read it, and he watched her face as she read it, watched the particular quiet joy that moved through her, controlled and deep, the kind of happiness that lives in the chest rather than the surface. She set the letter down. She looked up at him. He was standing close. He hadn't been thinking about how close, had simply moved to where he was standing, and the air between them was the quality of air before weather, charged and still. "Cole," she said. "I know," he said. "I have something I need to say to you," she said. "Directly, not implied or incremental or the way I usually do things." "All right," he said. She squared her shoulders in the particular way she had when she was facing something that required courage rather than competence. "I came here for practical reasons," she said. "That was true. And I told you on the first day that whether this became anything more was up to the choices we made. That was also true." A pause. "I have been making choices all this time that have been moving in one direction, and I think you have been too, and I am asking you directly whether I'm reading that correctly." He looked at her for a moment, at the gray-green eyes, at the precise honesty of her, at the woman who had read his water and rebuilt his infrastructure and argued for his ranch to a banker and stayed. "You're reading it correctly," he said. Something broke open in her face, not apart, but open, like a door. The careful composure, the long-practiced professional containment, all of it released into something warmer and more real and more vulnerable, and she looked at him with everything she'd been holding back, all of it present and visible and asking for nothing more than what he was already offering. He stepped forward, she didn't step back. His hand, the right one, healed now, no longer bandaged, came up and found the side of her face, and she closed her eyes for just a moment. And when she opened them again, she was looking at him with something that was completely legible and entirely certain. The afternoon light lay across the floor of the room, golden and very quiet. What happened next belonged only to them, to the weeks of work and attention and the long, patient accumulation of knowing each other. And the room held it gently, the way the land holds water, keeping it safe in the place it was always meant to be. The ranch changed that autumn. Not all at once, not dramatically, real things rarely change dramatically, despite what stories sometimes suggest. But it changed the way living things change. Incrementally, continuously, driven by the accumulation of small choices and daily commitments that, taken together, add up to something that is no longer what it was. The cattle recovered. By October they had 23 head, 3 new calves having arrived in September, and the mood of the herd had shifted in that particular way that healthy animals have: more movement, more sound, more of the ordinary territorial negotiation and social behavior that had been absent during the worst of the drought. Berto said it was the water. Young Sam said it was the regular handling. Ilara said it was both, plus the fact that animals know when the people around them have stopped being afraid. Cole thought she was probably right. The water system held through the first autumn rains and into the early cold, and Ilara had spent 2 weeks in September extending the secondary drainage to reach the north field, which had been dry since before Cole's father's time. The grass was already different there by October, not transformed, but the beginning of transformation, the first suggestion of what it might become given time and water and care. She had also, without fanfare, established a small working library in the study, which was now the room she used during the day for her assessments and correspondence, and the detailed land-use planning she had begun to develop, because the projection document had been the beginning of something larger, a vision for what the ranch could become over 5 years if the recovery held. She had requested several books from a St. Louis supplier surveying texts, hydrology references, a cattle management manual that was more recent than anything Cole had, and they arrived in a crate in mid-October, and she distributed them on the shelf with the same precise efficiency she brought to everything, and the room became a working room, a real one, the kind of room that has a purpose it's being used for. He liked seeing it. He liked the evidence of her presence throughout the ranch, not as occupation but as investment, as the physical manifestation of someone who had decided to stay and was building accordingly. They did not talk endlessly about what they were to each other. They didn't need to. It was present in the ordinary texture of days, in the coffee in the morning, in the particular quality of the silence they worked in the way his hand found hers in the evening sometimes, naturally, without ceremony, the way hands do when they have found where they belong. It was present in the way she brought problems to him directly, and he brought them to her, and they thought through them together at the table, two intelligences that had learned to work together the way two channels of the same stream eventually learn to run in the same direction. It was present in the way she laughed more now, more often, less guarded, that short bright sound less taken by surprise by itself, as if she was getting more accustomed to being happy. It was present in the way he slept differently, better. The grinding vigilance he'd carried for years, the constant low-level dread of the next thing going wrong, it hadn't vanished, because ranching in this country is a life that keeps its demands on you and never lets you fully relax. But it had changed in character. It was the vigilance of someone who has a partner in it now, who is not facing the territory alone. I used to feel like the ranch was something I had to save, he told her, one evening in November, frost on the grass outside and the wood stove making the kitchen warm and close. Like it was drowning and I was the only person holding it up. And now, she asked. Now it feels like something we're building, he said. That's different. She looked at him across the table, in the warm yellow light, with that open expression she had now, the real one, the one that lived below the composure, and that he had learned to recognize as her most honest face. It is different, she said softly. Berto announced his retirement in November, which was expected. He'd been talking about his daughter's place in New Mexico for 2 years, and they had a proper dinner for him, with a pie that Alara made from dried apples and with remarkable success. And Sam played 3 songs on a guitar he turned out to own, which no one had known, and Berto said his goodbyes with the quiet dignity of a man who has spent his life doing honest work and has no regrets about it. Before he left, he pulled Cole aside by the barn. "You did all right," he said, which from Berto was a significant declaration. "She did all right," Cole said. Berto shook his head slightly. "Both of you, you did all right together. That's the part you don't always get right." He left the next morning, and the ranch was quieter for his absence. And Sam moved into the more senior position with the careful determination of a young man who has been waiting for a chance to prove himself, and has one now. The letter from the agency came in late November, a follow-up, standard procedure, checking on the progress of the arrangement. Cole was the one who opened it, and he was the one who wrote the response, and he did not show Elara what he wrote, because some things are private. What he wrote was, "The arrangement has been entirely satisfactory. We have no need of your agency's further services. My wife has made herself indispensable to this ranch and to this life, and we intend to formalize the arrangement as soon as the local minister can be made available, which we understand will be December. I am grateful for your introduction, though I have become somewhat uncertain about the word arrangement, which seems inadequate to describe what has developed between us. Please consider this correspondence closed." He sealed it and sent it with Sam on the next supply run. And that evening he found Alara in the barn with the cattle in the long blue light of late afternoon, doing what she always did, moving among them quietly, letting them come to her, giving Birch the particular attention Birch had decided she was owed every day now. He leaned against the post and watched her, and the late November light was very beautiful on her dark hair and on the breath of the animals in the cold air. And the ranch was around them with all its difficulty and its demands and its particular wild country beauty, and the water was running in the channel outside, steady and certain, going where the ground directed it. "Alara," he said. She looked at him, her hand still on Birch's neck. "I wrote to the agency," he said. "What did you say?" "I told them we were done with arrangements," he said. She looked at him for a moment, very steady, very still. "And what did you tell them we were instead?" she asked. He held her gaze. "I told them you were my wife," he said, "if that's all right." She looked at him for one more moment, and then she smiled, really smiled, the full unguarded one, the one that was still difficult to look at directly without feeling exactly what he felt, and she said, "That's all right." Birch made a low sound of mild bovine commentary and pressed her enormous head against Alara's side, and Alara's laugh rang out in the cold barn air, bright and clear and entirely free. Cole pushed off the post and crossed the barn to her, and the cattle moved around them with their slow, accustomed dignity, and outside the water ran in its channel, and the land stretched out in all its difficult beauty under the enormous sky, and the ranch, their ranch, breathed around them like something alive. The spring that came after was different from any spring the ranch had seen in years. The water table held, and the extended drainage to the north field made the grass there a startling deep green that Cole could see from the house, and could not look at without feeling something that was too large and simple to put into words. The herd was 31 head by April, and Alara had begun the preliminary survey work for a secondary grazing rotation that would allow the south pasture to rest and recover while the north carried the summer load. She had also, quietly, begun corresponding with 2 other land assessors in the territory, men who had heard of the water work at the Hargrove Ranch through Aldrich, who had apparently not been as quiet about the projection document as professional discretion might have suggested, and there was a possibility of contract assessment work that would bring in supplemental income in the seasons when the ranch had capacity to spare. She showed Cole the correspondence one evening without asking his opinion of it, in the way she'd started doing things when she knew they were good ideas, not seeking permission, just offering visibility. He told her it was a very good idea. She said she knew. He laughed, and she looked pleased with herself in the particular way she had when things were going the direction she'd planned. They were married in December, as the letter had indicated, in a short ceremony at the church in Redemption Creek with Sam and Sarah Connolly as witnesses, and a small gathering of the people from town who had become, over the months, something approaching friends. Margaret Daly was not present, having returned to Denver in October. Alara wore a dress that was not white but was a very deep blue-green, the color of the creek on a clear day, and Cole, seeing her in it, understood for the first time in his life what poets were trying to do. In the evenings now they still sat on the porch when the weather allowed, or at the kitchen table when it didn't, and the comfortable silence between them had accumulated 4 more months of weight and warmth and was now something very substantial. Sometimes she read. Sometimes he worked on the equipment. Sometimes they talked about the ranch, about plans, about the past, about the things they were slowly learning about each other that you only learn through sustained proximity and genuine attention, and the willingness to keep paying attention long after the novelty of someone is gone, and what's left is the true thing, the real thing, the thing that either holds or doesn't. It held. One evening in April, Alara set down her journal and looked out at the north field, where the new grass was coming in, and said, "My father would have liked this place." "Tell me what he would have said about it," Cole said. She thought for a moment, and a small soft smile came across her face, private and fond. "He would have said the water tells the story," she said. "He would have gone to the channel and crouched down and put his hand in it and said, 'This is the whole thing right here. Everything this land can do, it'll do because of this.'" She paused. "And then he would have told me to take more precise measurements of the secondary flow rate." Cole looked at her, at the smile, at the particular quality of her in the evening light in April, with the land waking up around them, and water running where it was meant to run. "He sounds like someone worth knowing," Cole said. "He was," she said. "You would have liked each other." She paused. "You're similar in some ways." "Restless," he said. "Honest," she said. He thought about that. The ranch breathed around them. The north field was very green. "Alara," he said, "Oh, I'm glad you answered that advertisement." She was quiet for a moment, in the way that was not thinking but feeling, or perhaps not distinguishing between them, which was something he had come to love about her. "I'm glad you needed someone," she said, "and that you asked. I wasn't sure you'd come." "I wasn't sure you'd be worth coming to," she said, with a slight tilt of her head that meant she was also, secretly, deeply fond of him. "And," he said. She looked at him, gray-green eyes and all of her. The woman who had arrived on a stagecoach with her own bag and no illusions, and had rebuilt his water system and saved his ranch and decided to stay. Not because the arrangement required it, but because the land had good bones and the man beside her was honest, and the work was real, and the roots were taking hold. "You were worth it," she said simply. The evening came in over the ranch, and the stars appeared one by one over the eastern ridge, and the water ran in its channel with the clean, steady sound of something that has found its path and intends to keep it. And the ranch that had been dying, it lived. Not because of luck, not because of a miracle, and not because of any arrangement. Because two people, who had each been looking without knowing it for the thing that held them, found it. In the work, in the water, in each other. In a place with good bones, and the will to use them.